How is the family taking the events of your father's delicate and often critical condition?
Well, as anyone who's been through it, who's had an extended sickness in the family would probably understand. It's quite nerve-wracking. It's an emotional roller coaster. But as we are all wont to do, we get more and more used to it. I suppose we're handling it better now than we were before. It's never easy, but we're still here.
Well, what can you say about your father's steadfast decision to return to the Philippines, given his present health condition and the persistent rejection of all your appeals by the Cory government? Do you still think it is a good decision?
Oh, yes, certainly. There are no good reasons for us to stay here. The very basic fundamental question is whether or not we belong here. We do not. Home is in the Philippines, not here. Secondly, we have been accused of all kinds of terrible crimes, and we have been accused of all kinds of terrible misbehavior. And the place to answer that is in front of the Filipino people, not in front of the American media, not in front of the American public, not in front of the American political system, but in the Philippines. And certainly it was a good decision. As a matter of fact, I don't even think there was a decision that had to be made. It was almost a given.
Mm-hmm. If you were your father, would your decision be exactly the same, or would you do certain things differently?
Certainly the question as to whether or not one should return home is not really a question any longer. To go home, certainly, yes. To do things differently, who knows? It's very hard to say. I wouldn't be one to second guess him, but perhaps we see things in a different light now than we did 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Has the family discussed any plans in the event of the inevitable happening, God forbid, to your father?
Oh, certainly, yes. Of course, all the practical considerations have been discussed, and all the practical plans as to the disposition of there's no other way to put it, the disposition of the family certainly have been discussed, and I suppose we have a pretty good idea what to do. But this is the whole problem. The powers that be in the United States will determine what we can and cannot do. And although we may want to do certain things, we may not be allowed to do so. I mean, just as an example, my parents are not allowed to leave the island of Oahu, which is not up to us. It's no decision of ours. It's the American government doing what they feel the Philippine government wants them to do. And so long as we stay here, those sort of constraints will continue. And which brings us back to the reason why we must go home.
Mm-hmm. As the only Marcos son, and as the man bearing the name Ferdinand Marcos, do you think of pursuing your political career and taking up the cudgels for the Filipino people where your father has left off?
Well, you know, the only way I can answer that question is really to give you a general idea of where my priorities lie. As I mentioned before, obviously there have been many accusations leveled against the family, and all those have to be answered. Secondly, the family cannot be allowed to just exist or just survive within the political milieu in the Philippines. There must be an element of self-determination, in terms of our lives. And certainly we will work towards that, i.e. the legal questions must be resolved. The legal accusations must be answered. We must be able to live a life that is dignified and honorable. And it's a simple wish, but it seems to be something that they're not willing to give us, and therefore I will do everything I can to achieve that. As to a political career, well, it would seem that most of the time one finds oneself in a political career because of something that one believes in. Considering what has happened in the last 3 years, it would seem that is the sort of direction that one would inevitably take. I would certainly champion any cause that would try and right any injustice in the Philippines. If there's one thing the old man has instilled, I think, in all of us children, is a great nationalism and a great desire for equality and egalitarianism in the country. And should anything stand in the way of that, I will certainly work against it. If that takes a political identity, then so be it. I think that's actually getting ahead of ourselves, because simply the problems of the family are enormous and must be reckoned with before any of this sort of thing can be dealt with. As usual, when it comes to question of political career and things like that, it's really not for one to decide. It's not for me, it's not for you to decide. If the people ask you, then you must go, you must serve. If they do not, then you can't. And that's generally how that will be determined.
Very well put. Your father firmly believed in the American commitment to freedom, justice, equality, and human rights. Most of all, as he said to the U.S. Congress in his speech before the joint houses in 1971, he believed that the United States would never betray a friend. Do you still share your father's faith in the United States after all that has happened?
Yes. I certainly believe that the United States of America still stands for something. And we stand for that. And we are therefore wedded together in our beliefs. I think that what happened in '86 was a failure of the American system. I think there were personalities or cliques within the system that decided at some point to put us away. I sincerely believe this was a mistake for the Philippines and for the United States. I think that events since then are beginning to show that that is so. The plight of the average Filipino has worsened. Pag-usapan na lang natin ang gulunggong kung gusto mo. And the Americans and the specific interest of the bases, the American bases in the United States, their hold on that has become more tenuous in the last 3 years. And therefore, for the Philippines and for the United States, and I dare say for the Southeast Asian countries for whom democracy is important, for them all, I think this has been a mistake. Now, this is not to say that America has turned on us. Perhaps the powers that be did what they believed was the right thing having been told what they were told, which unfortunately wasn't true. I just wish, I just hope that they will realize what is truly going on back home. What you and I know, what the country knows, what the average Filipino knows. Life is harder. People are going hungry. The communist insurgency grows worse by the day, no matter what they say. Peace and order in the cities, in the countryside, is getting worse. And no matter how you put it, no matter what ideological buzzwords you care to bring up, that in the end is the measure of the success or failure of your program. And having said that, I will not sit here and tell you how life is in the Philippines. I haven't been there in 3 years. I will ask you, how has it been in the last 3 years? Has it succeeded? Has it failed?
Okay. Can you tell us, therefore, how you feel about the Filipino people in general now, 3 years after EDSA?
No different. I do not believe that what happened at EDSA was, I think it was a terribly well organized. I mean, it was very well done, very well organized. I'm sure there was a core group in that who believed. There were mistakes in my father's administration, for which I'm sure people were hurt. But I do not think, and I didn't think then and do not think now, that that was representative of the majority of the 54 million then Filipinos. I still don't think so. First of all, there was no revolution. I never saw a revolution. We left because we did not want to kill fellow Filipinos. We left the palace to go to Ilocos. We were tricked into coming to Hawaii. And I don't see in that a revolution. I cannot see how that constitutes a revolution. I cannot see, you see, it's impossible for me to differentiate how do I feel about the Filipinos. How do I feel about myself? I'm one of the Filipinos. It's impossible for me to say, I think about Filipinos that way. I think about myself in a certain way. I think about them in the same way. I'm a Filipino. I love my country. I love the people more than I love my country more than any other place in the world. I've been everywhere. I love my people more than any other people in the world. Perhaps I'm prejudiced. Now, so be it. And no, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed, not one tiny little bit. I can't see why it should. They haven't changed. I haven't changed. It's the same.
Is there anything you would like to say to address yourself directly to the Filipino people, perhaps in our own language?
Well, in spite of how far we are, nandito kami ngayon sa Honolulu, malayo-layo kami sa inyong lahat. Nalalaman namin at naririnig namin ang mga nangyayari sa ating bayan. Asahan ninyo na gagawin namin lahat ng kaya namin gawin upang kayo tulungan. But the Filipinos must come to a political maturity at this point in their history. Filipinos must understand that they must exercise their political will for what they believe to be right and what they believe to be just. We know the conditions that they find themselves in now. We know what life is like in the Philippines now. They know much better than we do. They must now exercise their political will, their political energy to make changes, to make their lives easier, better, and correct. And it's a turning point in the history of our country. It's a turning point in the maturity of political maturity of the general populace. And I think, knowing Filipinos as I do, that we will do the right thing.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon.